Yes, so we are all here.
Yep,
Thank you.
he's on.
Okay. So I think we can go ahead and get started. This meeting is being recorded. My name is Grace Bogdan. Welcome to the January 2023 New Year, new panel. We have two new members starting today. I'll just quickly introduce them. They're in the room. You might need to say something to have the camera pipe at you. But here's Jonathan Fitch, our new representative of landscape architecture. Can you wave?
If it'll stay low.
The camera's not tracking. You can hear me probably.
Yeah.
There you go. And
Hi,
we have
Jonathan.
Julia Beltikova. You can.
Hi, guys.
Julia.
And I do see on the screen we have Brian Kelly, we have Damon, and we have Rod. Tapping in from vacation. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Before we get started with our Chevy Chase item, I just want to go over a couple things. This will be my last meeting coordinating the DAP for a little bit. I will be taking some months off. And so during that time, Adam Bossy, our lead reviewer with Down County, will be taking over the coordination of the meetings. So if any of the panel members have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to Kashil or Adam or Stephanie. You all will be left in very good hands. Also, for today's item, 4702 Chevy Chase, this is the second site plan presentation. The DAP saw the item back in October and had some comments regarding the language and composition of the building and requested further changes and to come back. And so we sent around the memo and submission about a week or two ago that sort of outlined the changes that were made. And the applicant did provide additional 3D renderings in an updated submission. You should have received those links. And so I'm going to hand it over to the applicant for a quick presentation. And then we do have a member of the public in attendance, so I do want to make sure we reserve time for them to be able to speak. And so I will turn it over to Pat to get started.
Thank you, Grace. Very quickly, we have our team here, which is Hans Schmidt and Max Gross from Winthrop Management, our architect Luz Delmar Rosado, and our civil engineer Tim Longfellow from GLW. As Grace said, we were back before you in October, and at that time we explained, first of all, some of the operational changes, primarily that we moved all operations, loading, and trash from the southern portion of the building, the Nottingham side, to the Chevy Chase side. And then we presented the revised or the architecture to you, and the bulk of the discussion, in fact, I'd say 99% of the discussion really did focus on the architecture. And if I had to sum it up in one word, I think I'd use the word simplify. There were comments that there was just a little bit too much going on in terms of the architecture, and we do appreciate the comments. As is often or usually the case in these processes, the process works, and we think that we now have a much better design than we did when we showed it to you back in October. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Luz, who can walk you through what those changes were, and then obviously happy to answer any questions you may have. Luz?
Hi, how are you? Let me share my screen. Okay. So I assume that you can see my screen. And if I can summarize briefly, I'll jump right to the elevations. If I can summarize what we did is we took your feedback, like Pat said, and we focus on simplification of materials. How can we simplify the details? How can we add consistency in the details? And how can we refine some of massing moves in order to come up with a cohesive design? And what I'll do is I'll share with you elevation side by side of the different moves that we did to achieve this. And I'll compare with what you saw last time. On the left side of the screen, I'm going to show the previous elevation. And on the right side of the screen, this side of the screen will show where we are today. So if I start from as an overall, one of the things that we see is the material. We went ahead and reduced some of the stone materials that we were previously showing as a 3-story stone here. One of the common was that is competing with the rest of the material. So there's no dominant material or hierarchy in terms of the material and texture. So what we did is by reducing it and only showing it, highlighting the entrance, it makes the brick the dominant material of the building in this facade. And we highlight to focus on where the entrance is by changing that material only at this location. One of the things that we looked at was in this elevation was what happens above the garage. In the garage is recessed. You'll see that in the rendering. So there's depth on this area of the elevation. And what we did was create symmetry in the design by using similar windows and narrow down the pillars in the middle, so it feels more as a larger opening with having the pillars on either end of the opening below. And that was one of the comments that we heard. By doing that, the weight feels more like it's going to the edges versus being in the middle. We looked at other things that we did, look at the details such as balconies. We felt like in the previous design, we have different styles of balcony. So we really look at that and made balcony details around the upper part of the buildings to have the same design and the same recess. We also, one of the comments that we saw was like how we can make consistency in the details of the cornices. In the previous design, it was a very good point that we were showing a variety of details at the top of the cornice. So we went back and analyzed that, how we can bring consistency in the dimension and how we are treating the top end, the upper part of where the brick ends. So that's one of the things that you see in the difference from before and after. Another change so there are subtle changes. I think we just brings design to be more cohesive and simplify it, and just brings elegance. We looked at how to combine windows into a more vertical design and let the pillars come down and align with the pillars that are happening in the lower level. One of the things that we did while looking at those cornices were just to create similarity on the depth and the height. So we have we played with what's happening at the header of the windows, for example. So we added an element at the header of the window in order to get the distances that are similar in the design from the top of the window to the top of the cornice. So that's the front elevation. One thing that we did differently too is we are providing some Juliet balconies here more at a pedestrian level, just to provide more articulation in the facade and just make more active in that area. And that's the big picture of what we did on this elevation. Then I'll move to the east elevation. the before and after. Again, we reduced, if you see before, we were wrapping this stone material over into to the side of the building. And one of the changes that we did in this elevation is that you can see it in 2D, but it used to be only one plane. Except the recess of the balconies. So we play with the depth of the wall itself to provide a break in the massing, and show a variation of where the materials end. So we introduced this break here, and that's where we use the balcony as making that recess in between the massing of the building. We reduced the stone material here and only provided at the entry of the building, creating a gateway or archway it's like an exterior vestibule into the building. There is a change in plane on these elements here and here. And then as you go to the southern part of the building, you know that the building steps down into the Nottingham side. And then we introduce a change in the massing. It's a subtle change in massing, but it just helps providing the different proportion of the sections of the building. Another thing that we did is look at the consistency of the windows and how we can simplify that. Before we had a variety of dimensions throughout the building, so we found a way of creating similarity on the design in order to simplify the building and have a cohesive language. At the same way, we look at how all the cornices will turn the building, but maintaining consistency. Again, before we used to have a detail that was different here and that was different here, and you know, we have, those are some of the things that we heard, that the details were not quite wrapping through the side. So those are the things that we looked at. We always have the same top detail at the brick location and then at the upper window. And we look at how to group the windows into sections of 3 to provide verticality where the brick is showing. In the rear south elevation, what we did, one of the comments were, you know, maybe we are showing too much brick, or how we can make it, the brick felt like it might be, you know, conflicting or being too many details on the upper level. So what we did is we looked at when it changed, when the building steps back, was to eliminate the brick that's happening above and keep it more simple, simplicity on the upper steps by just having the same material wrap around, and then on the lower level, keeping the brick, but grouping the windows so it provides more, instead of a proportion that's half in the middle, having a more taller proportion with groupings of 3, again, following the same language as having groupings of 3s and looking how the cornices wrap around the building. I mean, I personally think that changing before this brick was felt like it was more applied into the facade. There was not a change in depth. So we agree that might have been, changing that to the metal panel, it looks much cleaner, simple. Moving on. If you see, we wrap up the cornice along this facade. This is before and this is after. We are using a balcony break here, similar to what's happening, using the same language that's happening on the east facade to break the mass and give that opportunity for the brick to end in an inside corner, and wrapping the detail across. And then on the wall, on this west wall, what we did was we heard comments about the color of the materials that we were using in the wall, whether having a light material versus the light panel material. What was the, you know, there were you can look at it in different ways. We looked at, is it having a light color to make it a subtle change, or using the dark material to have more cohesive in the language and the material used on the building. So we decided to look at that feedback, eliminate the light color material, therefore creating more simplicity in the design and continuation of the details that are happening in the building. So again, the cornices wrapped around, they have the same dimensions across, and then we simplify some of the details so that it didn't feel as busy as before. For example, at the base, before we have a series of metal panels and variation. We thought by simplifying the base and making it more consistent with what's happening below and letting the details happening above, it just makes it a better design. Another thing that we did, and then we heard comments were, you know, how can we align all the different features of the building? So that's one of the things that we did, is that before we have the outer fence that's happening in this area, we tried to, you know, follow the consistency and aligning that with the features of the building. So that gives you a picture of the elevations, and then I will show you the renderings now. Okay, so this is a rendering from Chevy Chase Drive. And you can see you know, I think that by using the brick, you know, maximizing the use of the brick on the ground floor makes a more cohesive design, and it simplifies the variety of the building. But you can see how there's a lot of depth that you don't see on the two-dimensional elevation, and how the building steps and how it's articulated on this section. You can also see how the garage entry is recessed into the building, and the change that we did above the garage, and how the cornices and details wrap the building around. This is a view from Nottingham. And again, if you imagine before, we had the brick on the upper levels. By removing that brick and maintaining the details on the lower portion, it just gives a better proportion at the lower pedestrian level. And then final but not least, this is the rendering view from Chevy Chase Drive of the east facade. And you can see where, you know, I explained that we use the balcony to recess into the building and have the brick wrap in and end on this corner, and how we are changing the massing, subtle change in massing just to, you know, provide additional articulation. But again, our goal was to simplify the use of windows, the use of the details, and the use of material, just to create cohesive in the design. And with that, Pat, I'm not sure if you have additional comments, but this is the last exhibit.
Thank you, Liz. No, I think we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
This is Grace. I just want to pipe in. I forgot to mention in the beginning, Jonathan will be recusing himself from this item. So he's in attendance, but he will not be speaking.
I'll go first. This is Rod. I mean, to your credit, I think the most effective thing you've done is create these 3D drawings. To me, they show a kind of level of calmness and refinement that you don't necessarily see in the drawing techniques associated with the elevations. The elevations, in my mind, still kind of the way they're rendered probably in the line weights used, don't necessarily pick up all the refinement that I particularly see in the 3D drawings. So I really appreciate you putting this together. I appreciate the refinements you've made, and it's to the betterment of the project, quite frankly. That's my reaction. It's not to say that you can't do more refinements, but I think you made a good step forward.
Yeah, I think that I remember being rather vocal last time about a number of the capping features for the masonry portions of the facade, and I think this is a great improvement. I think there's a lot of alignment issues that have been settled. The cornices seem to make much more sense. The palette of materials seems to be much better. The only point of hesitation now that I see this in context of the aerial photograph is the southern side of the building as it approaches the property line. I'm just sort of wondering if there could be more done to mitigate the scale differential between the building and the street edge, in particular, the confrontation of the building with the single family houses to the south of the site. I think about Cathedral Mansions on the cusp. Well, I guess that's actually Woodley Park on Cathedral in DC. It's a mammoth building, and it faces off against a street full of townhouses and single family houses. And the edge that's on Cathedral Street actually breaks down into a series of pavilionated pieces that look like townhouses rather than a mammoth apartment building. So I wonder if there's some way of modeling that southern surface to some degree to mitigate the scale differential between your building and the buildings to the south. In a more idealized urban situation, the scale of buildings would be changed on an alley and not on a street. And so it does present a little bit of a challenge, I think, for you guys. And that might be just something to think about. I don't know how my colleagues feel.
So I think this is, definitely keeps going in the right direction. I thought it was an attractive building the last time we saw it, but obviously some of my colleagues had some specific complaints here. But I think what the architect said, these are a series of subtle changes, and it definitely comes through and improves the look and feel of this building.
Can you pull up the southern elevations so we can think about Brian's points?
Brian, can you
remember? Do you have a rendering of the southern elevation? That would do it.
And I guess what I was saying is that if you look at that aerial that we just saw a moment ago flash past us, the ideal, the sort of canonical new urbanist way of changing a building typology from, let's say, a multifamily building like this one to a single family building would be done at an alley and not on a street front. But the block structure in this particular portion of town is, well, it's circumstantial. It's just it's too small to do that. So so that the zoning permits a big building, and I'm just wondering if the big building can be perhaps modeled in such a way such that facade on the southern edge might be broken slightly, so that maybe there's a possibility at the center base of that to push back slightly, and perhaps even model that more kind of as a reveal, maybe even allowing that grayish material to come through, permitting a reading at that point of something that is more akin in scale to the buildings directly across the street from it, and kind of balancing off the street section to some extent. That's really my only comment. If I were across the street, I might be a little bit nervous about this big building lurking at me from across the way. And I offer the Cathedral Mansions as an example. It's a building from the 1930s, I guess 30s, but it does on Cathedral Avenue. If you just zoom in on it on Google Earth and take a look at it, I walk past it all the time. I've always thought it's rather brilliant because it basically breaks a large multifamily apartment building down to the scale of the buildings across the street, which are single family townhouses.
What's the height of that base right there? Do we know? Looks like 40-ish feet?
It's about 30. It's about 37 feet from the curb.
Yeah, I mean that's the height limit for the houses across the street it's probably 35 feet. So that's pretty similar in height and scale.
Right, and just to explain, the reason it's 37 and not 35 is because it's not located right on the property line. So, we were respecting that 45-degree angular plane.
Brian, this is Atul Sharma with the director's office. I'm happy to hear you bring up that Wardman apartment building as a precedent. I actually lived in that building for several years, facing Cathedral Street, and I think some of the points you're bringing up are really good in that, this building has created the horizontal stepping back very successfully, but it is perhaps the vertical articulation that you are trying to get a little bit more refinement on. And to your point, I think the Cathedral Mansion does a few things to bring down the scale. It does have the setting in and out of the bays. Those bays are much wider, but that effect could be achieved here with the 2-bay, 3-part composition. The other thing it does very well, it applies a very deep cornice at the 3rd floor level, as opposed to the 4th floor level, so that the building itself reads more like a 3-story building versus a 4-story building.
Here.
So I just offer that for the DAP to consider, that maybe on this facade, the main cornice application can be at the 3rd floor, and the building can have a little bit of a stepping back in the middle piece of it, and perhaps have a more significant entry piece at the first 2 floors, which is another element that's used in that precedent very effectively to break down the scale. So just wanted to share that with you all, and happy to hear the DAP's thoughts.
That's very well said, and exactly what I was suggesting is that there might be a way to have 2 pavilionated pieces with a recess. And then the place to step down, to me, seems very clear in this rendering, that there is a squeezed bay that has a gray panel or something in it. And that might be the place where you might be able to affect that different reading. There might be a material change. There might be a slight recess of material of that floor above to slightly offset. There's an amazing amount on facade that you can do within a very shallow dimension to produce the effect of a change in plane without having to radically push something back 10 feet or 12 feet.
As a resident that lives across the street, I've lived there 16 years. I'm very happy to hear that you share some of my concerns. And I think point blank, this is a great building. I'm excited to see that somebody wants to invest in the neighborhood. I'm excited to see this level of detail applied to this. It'll be sad to see the historic mansion be pulverized into dust, but I'll make my peace with that when it happens. But ultimately, this is a great building. I think these 3D renderings are terrific. I've been very concerned about the sense of mass of this building. I think you've all echoed that. There's really 4 stories that front Nottingham Drive in that 35 feet because that first story is kind of recessed. And I thought it's a little bit of a disappointment to see you have to walk down some stairs to access those 2 units that front Nottingham Drive. I think if there's a way we could have some steps up, like a Georgetown townhouse where you walk up to the first units, I think that might be a design enhancement for us on Nottingham Drive. I think the 37-foot height is a little disappointing, but does seem to satisfy the requirements, the setback in the 35 feet. I'm curious if there's any appetite to entertain less than 35 feet and maybe use a different material so that horizontal band, even if it is broken up, feels a little bit less up there in the air, so to speak.
I'm sorry, just for the structure of the panel, we generally let all of the panel members comment and then ask for community comment at the end, so we can come back to that if there's time. Yulia, did you want to share some
Yeah, actually,
comments?
yes, I have some questions. Was there any discussion about what type of mechanical system, specifically exhaust, that would be used? And what I'm looking for is it going to be vertical or horizontal? Because, you know, if it's horizontal, we should probably see more detail in terms of articulation of that on the facade. I guess that's a question for the architect.
Yeah. At this stage, we have not defined the details of how it's going to be ventilated. I think that both options are on the table. One of the things is because we have the green roof requirement that we have to comply with, kind of reduces the amount of space we have for green space on top. So it's it might be that there's a combination of some of the ventilation might be horizontal and some other will be vertical.
Yeah. So my
but
comment.
At this stage, it's not being fully decided.
Okay, I understand. So my comment would be that if it's a horizontal exhaust through facade, it would be very important to show that on your elevations and renderings. It would probably affect location of your operable windows. And as we look at the facades, we would see thickened mullions, right, around the areas where you have operable doors and windows. And aesthetics of those exhaust openings would be very important, as well as locations, because they will significantly, I think, affect those facades. Probably will change the rhythm how you are dividing the volumes right now.
And so I have a question, and this is Elsa, Chief Down County Planning. Can you go to the front elevation? I don't think you see it on the perspective rendering. And it's and maybe this gets to Rod's point about just physically the way it's articulated, but sort of the asymmetry of it is a little jarring to me. Does anybody else have, just in terms of it's not quite symmetrical, but it's not really asymmetrical. It's sort of, I don't know if that, from a design excellence standpoint, am I alone in that? Paul, Atul, panel.
Well,
unresolved. It feels neither here nor there.
Yeah, it's a really good point, but what made me feel better was the 3D visualization, particularly coming from it. I guess it's the West. You know, you can really understand the building better, and I don't know. I was much more comfortable by seeing this view than I was the elevations. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I guess you don't see that shadow line for the first 3 floors, right?
Yeah.
When you look at the 2D, this is much better, but it's also from a very specific angle. You know, I wonder what it looks like when you're right across the street and the shadow lines are actually correct. So when I look at 2D, I'm a little concerned with asymmetry and not lining up what's happening up above. At the same time, there is a bit of a step back, so you maybe not going to it. So maybe the there needs to be another rendering that is of a different angle.
From the other
or
direction.
From the other direction, yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be really important, Elsa, to your point, to maybe look at this building from the other side where you see the main entrance into the lobby, which is kind of obscured by the tree right now. And I think that portion of the facade should read more as a sort of continuity from base to the upper floors. And if it does do that already, I think that's great. This piece of the facade, I personally don't mind it being broken down because it is the entrance into the garage. And then there are some step backs in the upper floor levels. So it's kind of making this side of the elevation a little less significant. I think if it was all lined up, you might start to pay more attention to the garage and things, but it would be really important to be from the other side and make sure that that continuity and the symmetry of floor to floor continuation is expressed. And it probably is, but I think it's worth looking at it.
It's very dynamic. It's very exciting from this view.
From this view,
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's point is well taken. That's really what's happening. There's many uses, right, happening in this facade. You have the garage empty, you have the entry to the building, you have the lobby and amenity frontage, such as units and a step that is based on the guidelines. So we try to put all those together and be cohesive, but and in addition to that, the unit layouts, right, that are happening in the units that are happening on the lower levels are more depth of what's happening above. It adds a level of complexity and we want to maintain simplicity. So it's a lot of things happening on this facade based on code, function, and use, and materiality. So I think that our goal was to break those elements down, and it helps reduce the scale of the building and add interest too. So we try to keep the alignment, but also make a feature that feels like this signature building and it's unique to our design.
Luz, do you have the ability now to show the perspective that focuses on the from the other angle, or do we not have that prepared?
I don't have it prepared, but I might. If you give me a minute, I might be able to put something. If there's additional comments, I can see if I can pull it up. I'll speak.
Paula, do you have any comments? I cut this nice gentleman off. But if you didn't have any comments, we can come back to his points.
No, I think that there was some comments in previous meetings about the symmetry, asymmetry of this front elevation, and I think they've actually handled it pretty well. So I'm happy with where it has gone, particularly on this front elevation.
And one of the things I think is important on the Nottingham side to point out is that we actually, the way it is existing is a narrower street, we're widening it. So the building in reality is stepped back from where existing street is. So we are adding more dimension to that, to the distance from where it is today to the family homes that are there. Let me see.
Rod, you're muted.
Okay, if I could pick up on Brian's comment, I think Damon and I have had a different kind of perspective of this, of seeing this project. I don't know, I think we've seen it, this is the fourth time maybe. We saw it a couple times during sketch time. One of the big controversies in the project initially was, let's call it the rear of the project on the residential street. And they have made considerable improvements in the design from the massing solution to where they are right now. Probably the biggest one of which is getting rid of the loading dock that used to be there, that was basically putting the rear end of the building out to the residential neighborhood. Now, having said that, I think Brian's comment is a really good comment and will make the project better. But to give the architects and the developers a little bit of credit, they have made some significant progress on that. Let's call it the rear elevation.
You're here.
Fully agree.
Sorry, sir. So I think your comments were focusing on this. Could you reiterate for the group? your
Sure.
question?
Yeah, I think they've done a tremendous job, and I'll echo what others have said here. They've really kind of taken our concerns on the streets and responded to them in a professional manner. And I compliment Pat and Luz. They've been professional through and through, and we really commend them for that. They've been a great team to work with, and I'm excited that they've engaged the right design professionals to work across the street from us. So I think the southern facade still gives me a little bit of pause. It's really 4 stories on our street and 37-ish feet of height. If some consideration could be given to stepping back at the center, I think that's a tremendously awesome idea. If it reads like, say, 3 separate masses that face Nottingham Drive would be great. I'd like to see consideration given to, instead of descending 5 or 6 risers to those units that face Nottingham Drive, if we could maybe ascend 5 or 6 risers to those units that face Nottingham, I think that might be an improvement for us. And there's a county or development typical detail on sheet. Let's see, I think it's A.08 to the left-hand side. It's a 3-dimensional rendering that shows a streetscape with some trees and some setbacks and whatnot. And it really does show 3 stories that face a street as a design standard. And so I understand that the way the slate slopes, it's higher on Nottingham Drive by about a half a story until you get to Chevy Chase Drive. It slopes probably about a half a story. So I understand the design challenges there, but I think I'll echo everything everybody else has said here. This east facade is the first thing I'm going to see driving down the street, and it's great. I love it. I think it's a really great way to interact with the neighborhood. It's a great way to see some breaking up of the massing. I think it's a great job, and I can see that they've really made this conscious decision to shove the mass towards Chevy Chase Drive that would have less of a visual impact. And again, I commend the design team for that. And that's what I have for the south facade.
Thank you. And one of the things is like we're envisioning this, that I'm talking about the height, we're envisioning this to either be like a steel or concrete. We're still working on the details, but the reason I'm bringing it up is that the floor to floor, even though it's about 3.5 floors that you see, the floors are shallower. So the perception wise that you see more, but they are in height, they are more compressed than other buildings because just the construction system is just a shallower system. So that's something that I think it adds to the reason why your perception is to see more.
May I ask what your structural system is for the floor? Is it PT?
We're still refining that detail, but we do not think it's going to be wood construction. So it just makes it a shallower system. So we don't know yet what the specific system will be. And let me see if so I might have an image that it's more frontal, but it's not a render image. It's just a massing clay. If this is something that, you know, shows the alignment of the windows, what's happening above from the Chevy Chase Drive. Pat, is this something that, is this what you were referring to?
Yeah, I had actually thought that we had something that was a little closer to be a finished product, but not quite, but maybe we don't have that.
Can you rotate it a little?
So that we're looking at an
Yeah.
angle somewhat?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's just, this is just a static image.
Yeah, this is just a static image of we have. It's again, it's a clay model. Doesn't have any materials or anything. But I do not have final product on that side.
I mean, I'm hoping that the image of the elevations, and I get Rod's point that just looking at the elevations, it's hard to discern, but looking at the elevations in concert with the perspective that you see here, hopefully that gets you comfortable with the way that front facade does look.
Elsa, to your point that you brought up about the symmetry and the asymmetry of it, you know, if you look at the rendered elevation that was from the side, you can see four bays that are very continuous from the bottom floor to the top. In this elevation, there are 4 bays that are pretty continuous, but then there's a 5th bay in the base, closest to the garage, that kind of is an added piece. And I just wanted to hear from the DAP if they thought a little bit of a simplification there, where you do have just 4 bays that continue on through the elevation, and that 5th bay maybe gets further simplified, so that really it creates a symmetrical bookend to the corner of the building as one turns the corner from this elevation to the side elevation. Would that be something that the DAP feels would be a positive small tweak and solve some of the concerns about the symmetry and the asymmetry?
I actually like that 5th bay because I think it brings the entrance into the symmetry of the base. So I actually like it the way it is.
But and this is and it's like feels like a small detail, but I appreciate the simplification of the materials.
Mm-hmm.
And the entrance, which is at the bottom left, has a treatment that's really found nowhere else in the building. And again, it may just be the rendering, it may just be the way the materials are rendered. And so it's the same material, but in a different application. But it feels a little, it feels left over. It feels like there was this nice refresh and simplification, and then you have this other piece that's left over. It seems like maybe an opportunity to maybe use some of the language or materials that are accenting on the other facades for the entry. But I mean,
yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, I was really happy to see the base convert to brick. I think that was a nice improvement. And yeah, this does feel a bit token now. So I agree with Eliza on this, actually.
I'm not an architect, so, but one comment, and I'm curious of the response from either Luz or the panel. Aren't doorways, though, often sort of celebrated and punctuated? And I think that was the intent here.
But you would get that with a canopy, right? You would get that with a canopy, right?
Well, that certainly would be one component, yes.
Yeah.
But you can still give it this treatment, but with just, so this looks like you have a different material. It's precast, it's whatever it is, it's a third material. And it just feels like you could give the same highlight within the existing material language, and it would be, yeah, I mean, this feels a little bit like a retail front. Like, you know, the retailer came in and did something that you could use the existing materials in a different way.
Is this stone base appearing anywhere else on the facades besides this corner?
On both sides of the corner.
Both sides of the corner.
That's it.
Around the
Yes,
corner.
because we have an entry from here, and we also can entry from the side. So it's like an outdoor vestibule area. What Pat says is correct. We wanted to have a differentiation in the entry and highlight it, so that somebody say, here is the front door. It might be the way it's rendered, but it's meant to, as you know, architectural stone, smooth, limestone-like material. The joints are very close together. It's hard to represent that in such a small scale, but it's supposed to feel, you know, seamless. And we are tying that in with what's happening with the material used at the cornice, how we are capping the top of the brick. And that color detail, which is small, it just ties in on every facade. But our goal was to highlight the entries with a subtle. The tones are the same using the brick. If the brick has like a variation on the tones, and then the limestone will be a more toned down or simple color that will highlight the entry.
I think personally that the change in material to an architectural stone at that place, at that one location, is appropriate. It's very common that the surround for a major entry would be a stone or differentiated material. I think if we take that away and it's just brick, that it makes the entry to the building less legible, and it makes me try to gravitate towards the center of that, or the center two bays of the four-part central salient of the facade. So I think it's actually helpful, and I do appreciate the fact that it turns the corner at this point.
I also think that it sort of, again, goes back to the symmetry, you know, with the stone and the garage. Not that I want the garage to be a major portion of the elevation, but there is, you know, again, some balance there by having that stone piece, you know, have a little bit more definition.
But would you bring it up a level? Would you like pull the socks up a little bit? Again, it feels like it's like neither quite here nor there. It's like, I hear what you're saying. It just feels, because it's just the entry and it doesn't go all the way up. It feels like that second floor is, I don't know, if it doesn't.
Well, I think it's part of the layering effect by bringing it up to the second floor. I don't know. I don't mind it at all.
Yeah, I like the fact that it's a rectangular form that's vertical in counterpoint to the garage, which is this huge rectangular form that's horizontal. And I do like the fact that it is celebrated more than the garage entryway. Also, I wouldn't bring it up to the third level. I think it allows for some slipping. It's part of the theme of this whole facade, is kind of staging and slipping of planes that move further back into the facade. So I would leave it as a two-story thing. But maybe where it says signage, maybe that ought not be a dark material, but maybe that ought to be a lighter material. I don't know, you know. Let's let the architects figure that out.
We have 5 of them, or however many.
I think the fact that it's, you know, the proportion is not 3-story, want to feel more intimate too on that corner. And just like you mentioned, highlighted that is different, and we are accentuating the entrance, but we also don't want to make it too large or too unproportionate.
Yeah, that feels pretentious, I would say, a 3-story one.
Yeah. One of the things that I understand your comments on Nottingham side, but now that I'm looking at this elevation, the fact that we have a break here, and it's a subtle break, right? It's not a lot of depth, but it separates the elevation into big segments. And I think in terms of height, adding another step, in all honesty, it's a very complicated interior space building, because every time we step, it just adds complexity to many things. You also want to make the building feasible in the inside for construction and for what's happening in the interior. We have steps on the front, we have steps on the back, we have articulation. So it's a small building that has simplicity in architecture character, but complexity in many other ways. But I think, so adding a step or the appearance of the step, it's more complex than adding a differentiation on depth. And maybe on the Nottingham side, it will ease your comments if we add a small break in a section. Maybe we have it like, feels like 2 segments on the building, on the rear. And it speaks to the same language that we are using here on the front of the building.
To sort of reinforce Brian's comments, could that break be towards the middle of that facade and not towards the side of the facade, so that the articulation becomes a 3-part articulation versus a 4-bay and a 2-bay? Because that will really start to give this building a more of a townhouse proportion as opposed to a side end of an apartment.
Maybe we do a subtle change like this. And then that gives you, differentiation. Just a thought.
Or possibility it's the center 2 bays that get pushed slightly back, and it's, yeah, like that. And the pushback doesn't need to be gigantic.
No,
Yep.
I understand.
Yeah.
I like the center 2-bay idea, if I may chime in. And if it matches the metal panels we saw at the front, I probably like that too. And the step back probably needs to be nothing more than a foot to read like a step back. But I understand the design complexities associated.
Yeah, I think we keep it in brick again because we want to cohesive in the design. We have cohesive of what's happening on the bay. We don't want to cut paste too many items. It's just a small move, and that just breaks the scale a little bit more. And then that brings the language of what's happening on the front, and then we just have matching variation basically in every elevation. And then I think that ties everything together.
Okay.
Okay.
I am hopeful, given, as Rod said, that we've been before the group 4 times. Is there a way to capture that last comment about breaking up the mass on Nottingham in the minutes, so as we can not need to come back to the DAP? Not that we don't love the DAP, but I think that would be the most efficient way in order to let us start proceeding with this. Is the panel comfortable with that?
I think what we would do, Pat, is that we would take the vote with that being a condition that would be provided in the elevations during site plan review.
Mm-hmm.
And to help wind down the conversation, the applicant is requesting 25 design excellence points for the project. Based on the conversation today, it looks like we're heading in that direction. Does the panel feel comfortable taking a vote today? You're muted, Rod.
Sorry. Yes, I do.
I think we're ready for a vote on this.
And is 25 points agreeable to the panel?
I'll go first. Given the guidelines that we have, this stair step of 10 points, 10, 20, 30, I think 25 is ambitious. Particularly, I would think that 25 is approaching that superlative range. I think this is a good design. I think, but we also need to take into consideration all the other items and issues that are outlined in Pat's letter. So I think 20 is probably the right point level for this project.
I second that.
I'm comfortable with 20. Does that give the applicant what they need as far as their benefit points?
To tell you the truth,
Yeah, go, Pat.
I was going to say I don't recall, so I need to look.
But
a formal application hasn't been submitted. So.
Well, and we also,
Right.
I mean, I think that we don't want to give points because they need points. I think it should be what the panel thinks is the right number of points. And if they need points, they can get points somewhere else.
This is my first review of this project. I do think that 25 is quite high for this. So I would agree with the DAP members that 20 is appropriate, and I can support that.
Okay.
Sounds like that's it.
Brian, are you in agreement? I see.
Yes, I seconded it.
Sorry.
Yes. So that
All right then.
genuinely means I'm in agreement.
Thank you. Did not hear.
I'm not going to second something and vote against it.
All right then. I will get these notes together and online soon. And thank you so much. Happy first meeting. Thank you. And currently we don't have we haven't had anybody reach out about the February agenda yet, but we will be in touch with you for next month shortly. Enjoy the rest
Best of luck to you, Grace.
Thank you.
Yes, congratulations,
Look
Grace. That's
you-
wonderful.
Look forward to your return.
Thank you.
You have to wish
Thank
the
you,
rest of the
everyone.
Down County team best of luck surviving in her absence.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.